Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Gatney, and I am the coordinator of the CVFS webinar series. Our host today is Emily Trelevin, Research Assistant Professor at the Population Studies Center at the University of Michigan. Emily is going to present on CVFS migration data. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. We ask that you remain muted until then. During the Q&A, you may raise your hand to ask a question, or you can submit a question at any time today using the chat feature. We'd also like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view from the CVFS website, and we'll also put the slides up there too. Okay, Emily.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Thanks everyone for coming today. And Heather, I will just note that I cannot see the chat while I'm presenting. So if there's any, I'm happy to take any quick clarifying questions if you can just flag those.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. So today I am going to give an overview of different ways in which the CVFS can be used to study migration-related topics. So I will start out with an overview of migration in Nepal, international and internal migration. I'll talk about why the CVFS is such an excellent data source to study topics related to migration. I'll quickly review some prior and ongoing studies of migration within the CVFS and touch on some possibilities for future topics. And then I'll go over the different data files and measures of migration in the CVFS, discuss ways to operationalize those measures, and then briefly overview how to link measures within the CVFS. So as I mentioned, we'll start with a quick overview of what migration looks like in the context of Nepal. But first, globally, labor migration is increasing, both in terms of absolute numbers of migrants, as well as the share of the world's population who are migrating for work. Typically, it's a response to disadvantage or limited opportunities in a community or country of origin. And with migration affecting a growing proportion of people and families, it's affecting a growing proportion of people and families globally, even if they themselves are not migrating. International migration is highly prevalent in Nepal. It's thought to be predominantly to Persian Gulf countries, which the government of Nepal estimates is the destination for about 85% of migrants in Nepal. But the border with India is open and porous, and so it's known that some migrants go to India first and then migrate to other countries from India. And currently, there are Nepali migrants in at least 150 countries globally. Predominantly, Nepalese are migrating for labor reasons to seek employment. Often these are on temporary 2 to 3 year contracts or other formal or informal short-term employment agreements. But increasingly, we also see that there's education-related migration, so people traveling to other countries for school. It's predominantly men of reproductive age around 15 to 44 who are migrating. Many of them are married and they are leaving their wives and children if they have them at home. Internal migration is also becoming very common in Nepal, and it's often driven by urbanization. So this is a figure right here on the right from a book chapter that was published in 2020 by Samir KC, who estimates the flows between various districts in Nepal. So we can see that there's lots of migration from districts across Nepal into Kathmandu. And then in Chitwan, over here where the CVFS is cited, we see both flows into Chitwan and then flows from Chitwan out to other districts. There was a legal change in Nepal in 1985 that first permitted international migration. And I'll note that the flights, international flights from Nepal increased after 1995 when the CVFS was started. So international migration in the early years of the CVFS might have been more difficult, but we saw a jump in international flights in the mid to late 2000s, and that's what really enabled international migration, particularly to the Persian Gulf. So this is a figure put together by Nell Compernol and Bill Axon in a 2019 article that was published in Demography. And labor migration, as I noted, is highly prevalent. This graph shows the labor approvals to work abroad, excluding India, from 2008 to 2022. So we see a steady rise from the late 2000s to the mid 2010s. We did see a bit of a dip after the earthquake in Nepal in 2015, then a subsequent rise, and then decline again with COVID, but rates have increased again. As we see, men are in orange, who make up the vast majority of labor migrants, with women much smaller proportion in green here. And according to the Nepal census in 2022, 23.4% of Nepali households had at least one member living abroad. And as migration has increased, we see that remittances have become an increasingly important proportion of Nepal's GDP. So in 2022, remittances to households in Nepal as a proportion of GDP was about 23%. So as I mentioned, the CVFS has some key features of its design that make it really well suited to study migration. As a reminder, CVFS has a nested data structure. So that means we study individuals who are nested within families or households, and those households are nested within neighborhoods that can all be linked to broader contextual data. So the CVFS study design has been reviewed in other webinars, and it's also described in detail on our website, so I won't go into much detail here. But with respect to migration, I want to note that family members within CVFS households are easily linkable or even across households, even if they aren't in the same location. So that can be done using the relationship grid, which I'll touch on later. We use a whole family design, meaning that there's no single head of household or reference individual in the household, which further facilitates those intra-household linkages. And most importantly, the CVFS follows all individuals over time and regardless of where they are physically located in a given month. CVFS uses phone interviews to reach respondents who have migrated, regardless of where they are. And the study's been ongoing for just about 30 years. So that means we have prospective measures of location and migration timing in that whole period, as well as retrospective measures for the years before the study or before a specific respondent was enrolled. And then since 2008, those measures have been at the monthly level. As a quick reminder, individuals in the CVFS enter the sample through birth, marriage, or joining an existing study household for another reason, and leave the sample through death or occasionally loss to follow up. So note that migration is not a reason that individuals leave the CVFS, and that's a key difference between the CVFS design and health and demographic surveillance studies that follow individuals who are only within a given geographic location. And it's the same for households. Households can enter the study by moving into a sampled neighborhood or splitting off from an existing household and leave the sample through loss to follow-up, but not migration. As a quick snapshot of what migration looks like in the CVFS sample, I pulled data from January 2022. Of all the individuals in the household registry that month, just under 25% of individuals were outside the Chitwan district. So we had the majority that were in CVFS neighborhoods or in other areas of the Chitwan district, as well as 600 people in Kathmandu, 1,400 in other areas of Nepal outside Chitwan and Kathmandu, and 1,800 in various foreign countries. This map shows the foreign countries in which those individuals were located in January 2022, and that's over 55 countries in almost all regions of the globe. And the top destination countries for CVFS respondents are predominantly the Persian Gulf. We see high rates of migration to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, also India, Australia, and Japan. So next, I'll describe some of the various ways CVFS data has been used to study topics related to migration. This shows the breadth of possibilities for CVFS data. I'll first overview topics that have been in published studies, but I want to note this list is not exhaustive, so I apologize for any omissions. And I also want to note that I did not include methodological papers. So one of the main ways that CVFS has been used to study migration is looking at individual and household determinants of migration. And many of these papers provide empirical tests of migration theory. So looking at the socioeconomic status of labor migrants relative to non-migrants, or identifying other sociodemographic predictors of migration, whether that's internal or international, looking at, for example, caste and education. Another paper has looked at social capital and networks and how those affect migration. CVFS papers have also looked at marital quality, agricultural engagement at the household level, and most recently, alcohol use disorder. The CVFS can also be used to look at contextual influences on migration. So that includes papers on environmental change, including drought, the location and existence of community services, the effects of armed conflict and mass media. And then other studies have looked at migrant attitudes, beliefs, and values across a wide spectrum of different attitudinal measures. So this includes looking at change over time in migrants' values and beliefs, how values and behaviors shape plans to migrate, the effects of aspirations on decisions to migrate, and then the relationships between family obligations, fatalism, and developmental idealism and migration. And then other papers have looked at the effects of migration on those left behind in the household of origin. So the effects of migration on sending household family members and populations. So some of this work has included attitudes towards marriage, autonomy of wives when their husbands migrate, and dietary diversity among household members remaining in the households of origin. And we can do that because we have data on both migrants themselves and their family members remaining in Chitwan that can be easily linked to the migrant themselves. And then similarly, we can also look at the later effects of migration on migrants themselves and their households, exploiting the panel nature of the CVFS. So some of this work has included how households invest remittance income, the consequences on farming and agricultural productivity in households sending migrants, and then how migration affects later life health among migrants. We also have quite a few studies in progress related to migration and various outcomes using CVFS. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. It just happens to be the ones that I am aware of. So apologies to omissions. And these studies are in various stages. Some have been presented at conferences and already submitted for peer review publication. Others are in progress. So this includes several studies looking at parental migration and effects on children. So that includes birth weight, child health linked to both migration and household remittance receipts, as well as predictors of children's exposure to parental migration. Those are all projects I'm working on. Dirga Gamiri and Carlos Mendez de Leon are leading a project related to migration and later life health and cognition that data collection should be launching soon for. And then Emma Leibovitz is working on a project related to paternal labor migration and child and its effects on the transition to adulthood. And then Emma Leibovitz and Emma Banchoff are jointly working on a project related to parental migration during childhood and later life mental health outcomes. So that was a very long list of prior and ongoing migration studies, but there are still many, many, many other possibilities using the wide breadth of CVFS measures. So within individuals, we now have a longer observation time now that the CVFS is nearing its 30th anniversary. So analysts could look at longer term outcomes using a life course perspective. It would also be possible to compare outcomes across cohorts and thinking about age period cohort designs, looking at relationships between migration and education, health outcomes, fertility, family formation, and other measures collected in the CVFS. I also want to highlight the possibilities for intergenerational linkages or even laterally extended kin in the same family. So siblings and cousins, we now have about 3 generations or even 4 in some CVFS households. And we could also look at effects of migration on older generations, not just on migrants' children. There are also many possibilities for contextual studies. These include using neighborhood and area level measures within the CVFS linked to individual migration measures, linking individual migration and neighborhood level changes or outcomes, linking to GIS external data sources to exploit spatial variation, and linking to policy or economic data to exploit temporal variation. So next, I'll turn to reviewing migration-related data sets within the CVFS as well as specific types of measures. So there are many potential measures of interest to scholars studying migration. These include migration timing, when someone leaves to migrate, both in terms of the calendar as well as the life course, their duration, how long do they migrate for? CVFS papers have used migration definitions that vary from 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or more. Often the destination is of interest to scholars. As someone migrating to within Nepal, to an international destination, or even specific regions globally might be of interest, such as the Persian Gulf countries. We can also think about whether a person has been exposed to migration through a family member, perhaps a parent, a child, or exposure at the neighborhood level or other households in their neighborhood sending migrants. The CVFS can easily be used to examine migrant versus non-migrant characteristics. Those might be individual characteristics such as education, social group, or household level characteristics such as engagement in agriculture. We also have data related to remittances. So when do households receive remittances? How much did they receive in terms of remittance income? And how are they using those remittances? We also have neighborhood level data related to migration related services, and then some individual measures related to aspirations, social values, and attitudes toward development that might also be of interest with regard to migration. So the most important CVFS data source for migration is the household registry, which we often abbreviate as the HHR. This is a household interview, but data are recorded at the individual level. And this is across all months of the CVFS, which has now been ongoing for more than 300 months. So the first month of the study would be considered month 1, and then up to month 300 was January of 2022. And the household registry has monthly location measures for all individuals in the CVFS. It's a continuous measure of demographic events with monthly precision. So that includes birth, marriages, divorces, moves in, moves out, deaths, and school enrollment with specific place locations. So that's a way to generate time varying locations with migrant destinations. And I'll go over how to generate measures in a moment after reviewing the other CVFS data files related to migration. The away sheet is a brief questionnaire that's administered as a part of the household registry. So if a household registry respondent reports that a member of that household is away, so away from where the household is currently located or at a different location than the household, then they are administered the short closed-ended questionnaire. It includes questions on where that household member is, what's their current location, what was the reason that they left the household, whether they're sending remittances, and a few other characteristics. So this would be the sample for this data set would be any member of a household in the registry who's currently at a different location. And currently we only have the away sheets for months 1 to 36 available on ICPSR, where all CVFS data is archived. But we have flagged these for deposited ICPSR in the future so that they will be available in the short to medium term, hopefully for more months of the household registry. The neighborhood history calendar can be used to generate neighborhood level measures of interest related to migration. So this is an event history calendar that was collected in 1996, 2008, 2016, and is slated and funded to be collected in 2025, although I do not know the exact timing. And this is a record of services and institutions in each of the 151 CVFS neighborhoods retrospective. So the 2025 calendar would collect information on the presence of the set of services from 2016 to 2025. We have also collected remittance history calendars at 2 time points, at 2015 and 2019. So this is an event history calendar that's modeled on the life history calendars at the individual level and the neighborhood history calendars that I just mentioned. So this is collected at the household level. In 2015, we collected these among all CVFS households at that time. And then in 2019, they were part of a child health data collection. So they were collected among all households with children less than 10 years of age. And in this calendar for the set of years, so in 2015, respondents provided information on each year, 2006 to 2015. And the respondent reported each migrant from the household and then reported which years that migrant was away, their location, and then the remittance amount that they sent back. And that was in total for each year that that person was away. So it's reported at the migrant year level, which could then be summed to provide total remittance income for each household in each year if a household sent more than one migrant. The 1996 and 2008 individual interviews, which were closed-ended questionnaires, also included individual level measures that might be of interest. So this includes a lot of the attitudinal, value, and aspiration measures that I described, as well as a breadth of sociodemographic characteristics and information on respondents' childhood experiences and context, and marital and family relationships. So these have been done in 1996. That was all members of all households in the CVFS neighborhoods, ages 15 to 59, and their spouses, and that was just over 5,000 individuals. And then in 2000, we had a reduction in the number of neighborhoods after the initial 96 baseline. In 2000, individual interviews were administered to all members in those households that were 15 to 59, their parents if they were unmarried, and their spouses if they were ages 15 to 34, with a sample of, again, just over 5,000 individuals. And then there is also a panel data set available for individuals that were both in the 96 and 2008 individual interviews. And then finally, I want to mention a 2015 survey that was funded by DFID UK, which is the data collection that included the remittance history calendars that I just mentioned. And this data collection also included a household level survey, a closed questionnaire that included information on households' agricultural engagements, their land holdings, food security, and their livelihood. So what kind of labor they were engaging in: wage labor, salary, are they small business owners, which are often related to decisions to migrate and labor migration. That survey also had several short follow-up surveys, I believe 5 times in the 3 months, every 3 months after the initial survey, that asked households about how they were using any remittance income across several domains. So were households using remittances for general expenses, to purchase agricultural equipment, for health-related expenses, for education, and so on. I noted earlier that the monthly level measures of demographic events in the household registry, including migration, started in 2008 or in month 138 of the CVFS. So to assess migration before month 138, or before 2008, we need to turn to another data source, the life history calendars. And those were individual event history calendars that were collected in 1996 and 2008. So in 1996, those were annual measures over a respondent's lifetime, or in 2008, if that was their first interview. And then from 1997 to 2008 for respondents who were re-interviewed in 2008. And the event history calendars collected information on which years a respondent engaged in any international travel, and then if so, what country or countries did they go to? And then also whether respondents had traveled to Kathmandu. And so it's possible to code the destinations to which individuals went at the annual level, and then the years away, which years, and then how many years they were away, using those life history calendars. From month 138 onwards, or 2008 onwards, it's possible to use the household registry then to get at monthly level measures of each person's location in that month, and defined as where they spent the majority of the month. So there are 2 different variables that can be used to do this. The location variable, which is abbreviated LOC, with the registry month. So for example, if I want to see a respondent's location in month 138, the variable name would be LOC 138. Has the current detailed location for every individual, and then the migration variable has the destination for each person defined as away from their household. So if a person is at the same location as their household in a given month, the migration variable, or MIG, with the HHR month number, would be blank, but it would have a value if they are in fact at a different destination. So an analyst could use loops to identify the month in which a person's location changes, or the number of consecutive months in a specific location. So I'll now go through some theoretical examples of how to generate these kinds of variables from the registry. So this is a made-up example, not using made-up ID numbers. And I'm showing here the location variables for months 250 to 258. So of course, in the real registry, these would go on after month 250, 259 and onwards, and then we would have monthly variables for months 1 to 249 as well. So we can see there's a lot of different kinds of codes here. So the 3-digit codes are CVFS neighborhoods. Here we see 212 and 218, but in the real data, our CVFS neighborhoods have code 001 to 151. The N codes indicate a specific district in Nepal, and the F codes indicate a specific foreign country. We also see A when an individual is not yet born, G when they're gone from the survey or lost to follow-up, and D when an individual dies. And these are all documented in our code books that are available both through ICPSR and the CVFS website. So if we wanted to identify which individuals have migrated internationally, we can write code to tag individuals that have months where their location is reported as a foreign country, or an F code, as I just noted. So here we can see for this individual in month 252, they went from Chitwan to foreign country 4. And then similarly, we can see this person left for country 45 in month 258. And then we can also see returns to Chitwan. This person returned from country 91 in month 257. In the subsequent month, they're back in their household neighborhood location of neighborhood 212. And then same here, we see that this person returned from country 966 in month 251. The N codes, as I noted, represent destinations in Nepal. So again, we see this person spent 2 months in District 57. They left in month 253 and returned to Chitwan in month 254. Similarly, this person went to District 1 in month 253 and returned in 254. But I want to note a special code to watch out for is N56, which actually represents the Chitwan district. So this signifies a person who is living in the Chitwan district, but outside a sample neighborhood. So often an analyst would choose not to consider these people migrants because they could have in theory moved to a new house 1,000 feet away from the CVFS neighborhood. But if it is outside the neighborhood boundary, they will get their location code as N56. Of course, that would depend on the research question, and the migration variable will note respondents that have moved to different neighborhoods within the CVFS sample. So this is really up to the analyst and depends on the particular research question. We can also look at the timing of migration. One of the easiest ways to do this is to write loop codes to tag months in which a person transitioned to a new location from the month before. So here I've highlighted this person transitioned to being in District 57 in month 253. This person transitioned to being in Country 4 in month 252. And then again, this person transitioned to being in District 1 in month 253. We also, again, want to watch out for A, G, and D codes here. So this is just a general warning to be careful when you are writing loop coding. So here, this might get tagged as a transition, but transitioning from A to a location actually just signifies that this person was born. Transitioning from a neighborhood to code G signifies that that person exited the survey or was lost to follow-up. And then the transition to code D signifies that that individual died. So generally, we want to be specific about looking for transitions from one location type, whether that's a CVFS neighborhood to other location types, such as districts in Nepal or foreign countries. And then with this snapshot, looking at duration, we can see a few examples where we can see the full duration of these migration episodes. So this person was away for 2 months. This person was away for 6 months in a foreign country. And then again, this person was away for 2 months in a district. So you could write code to count the number of consecutive months that a person was in the same location. So you might tag the number of consecutive months a person was in another district in Nepal, or that they were in a foreign country. And I noted earlier that CVFS papers have used a range of durations to assess what counts as a migration spell. So that could be 1 month, but often people use slightly longer durations, such as 3, 6, or even 12 months, so that we're really more likely capturing labor migration versus visits to family or religious pilgrimages. But again, this is really up to the analyst and depends on the specific research question. For these other migration episodes, just as a reminder, since this is a short snapshot from month 250 to 258, we would need to identify the actual first month or the actual last month here, which we can't see in the snapshot. So I mentioned the away sheet earlier, which is the short questionnaire that's administered with the household registry, capturing some basic information for each time a household member departs. So it would be one away sheet per new departure for a household member. And one of the questions on the away sheet is that person's reason for leaving. So that the reasons include schooling, labor or work, marriage, visiting family or friends, seeking healthcare or caring for a family or friend or other with a specified field. And so this variable could be used to generate dichotomous or categorical variables related to a person's reason for migration. So a person might want to generate a binary indicator of whether someone migrated for labor versus another reason, or a categorical measure of the actual motivation. Using the neighborhood history calendars, it's also possible to generate measures related to migration-related services in the CVFS neighborhoods over time. So this might be the presence of services in a given year, or how that changed over time, the proximity of services to that neighborhood. And then we also have measures of how far each neighborhood is to the urban center in Chitwan, Narayangat, Bharatpur. Which is the city on the eastern side of the study area. And then we could also merge to measures of transportation access. So one example is thinking about proximity to money transfer services. So something like a Western Union. So we could, for each year of the neighborhood history calendar, I believe this was added in the 2016 calendar. So we have measures from Nepali year 2060 to Nepali year 2071. For each year, how many minutes would it take to walk from that neighborhood to the closest money transfer service? So in theory, we could create a binary variable that's equal to 1 if the neighborhood has a money transfer service within a 15-minute walk in that year, and 0 otherwise if it's farther than 15 minutes. So for 2060 or 2004, we see that less than 6% of the neighborhoods would meet that criteria. But access to money transfer services increased over time. So by 2065 or 2009, more than 15% of neighborhoods had a money transfer service within a 15-minute walk. And more than half of neighborhoods had a money transfer service within 15 minutes walk by 2071 or 2015. So these variables could be easily linked to other individual, household, or neighborhood level variables to assess the relationship between proximity to money transfer services and other outcomes. The GIS locations of the neighborhoods are currently restricted use, but with that data, an analyst could link those locations to GIS software that could then generate measures of proximity to the main highways in the district, which we have here and here. They're a little bit hard to see on this graphic, or to road networks using a software like ArcGIS, for example. There are open source and public use measures of road networks and other measures of transportation that could be linked using GIS. And then finally, using the neighborhood IDs, a user could also generate aggregate measures of the individuals in that neighborhood to examine variation in neighborhoods and neighborhood population characteristics across the study. So this would be done by taking individual level measures from either individual interviews or the registry and grouping them by neighborhood ID. And so some examples of this might be the proportion of adults in a neighborhood who have ever migrated internationally for at least 6 months, or the proportion of households in a neighborhood that received any remittance income in the preceding year. So to generate some of these measures or other potential measures, users will need to link data across files. So that could be linking across individuals or linking across individuals in the same family. So that might be across data files, or over time, or over relationships within the household. So all of these kinds of linkages are possible and fairly straightforward in the CVFS, but I will refer viewers to 2 prior webinars that review how to do this in detail. The first is a webinar on data linkages, which I gave with Adrian Epstein in October of 2021. And then the second, for linking across individuals within the same household, I gave a webinar in March of this year on the relationship grid, which is the data file that links unique individual identifiers across households. So that's the easiest way to link parents and children, to link siblings, or other relationships of interest. And then finally, a user with access to the GIS locations of neighborhoods could also link to external data with GIS measures. So that might be climate data, for example, or other contextual measures. And I want to point viewers who are interested in that to Adrian's section of the data linkage webinar in October 2021. She gave a great overview of how to link CVFS data to other external data sources using GIS measures. So I will end there and we can open it up for questions. Thank you, everyone. And also it's the end of the semester. So of course, I understand if everyone is ready to be done and would like to ask questions at a later time.
You can tell it's a December webinar.
Yes.
I have a
Well,
oh,
go ahead, please. I can wait. Please.
no, you go first. I'll get my question together.
Okay, great.
No, I mostly wanted to say, Emily, this was super duper helpful, and as you might imagine, I already knew some of the data and history of CVFS, but to see you sort of lay it out for us was very clear and helpful, and I can only imagine about the number of potential analyses that can be done with these migration data. There's almost no conceivable end to it, I think. That said, I think we're doing this study among the older adults. We are, as an update, in the pre-test right now in Chitwan. Hopefully, I think it'll be February when we go. We can roll out the real, in-person interviews, because that's what it will be, with a life history calendar attached to it. Our primary interest, as you noted, is in the sort of late life health among older adults, and cognition and dementia-related outcomes. But I think there's plenty of other opportunities to look at sort of health ramifications of migration, of whatever sort or kind or type of migration there is. And I think my major point is, and question is, whoever would like to work with us on doing some analysis with existing data, not waiting, as impatient as we are, for the newly collected data to accumulate over the next year or so. Please let Usha, who is also online, and myself know. And I think mostly because it will, for us, mean quite a bit of startup time to really figure out, the data structure and how to, extract the data that are relevant to put into an analysis of individual health outcomes. So, Usha, I hope I can also speak for you that we would invite anyone who is interested in that topic of labor migration, or migration more generally, and a health outcome that has been assessed previously, like in 2015, maybe 2028, to let us know, and maybe we can form some sort of really productive collaboration on that topic. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Carlos, I'm glad you're here because I am not involved in the aging study for those who are not aware. So my knowledge about it is somewhat limited, and I would be curious if you can talk about it all. I talked a bit about measures from the earlier life history calendar. So I don't know if there's additional details related to migration that'll be collected in the life history calendars in your study.
Yes, so the idea is to Emily and everyone is to administer a new life history calendar in this interview that we're about to start, and so we will be collecting updated information, just like you said. The life history calendar covers the period since the last one that was done. So for us, that may mean 2015 for those respondents who had life history calendar data at that juncture, or maybe we have to go back further for other ones that somehow did not participate in the 2015 interview. And a focus of that life history will be on migration, and particularly with regard to labor migration, since it is a focus of our grant, of our study. So we will be updating that information with information from the last, whatever, it will be 10 years or so.
Great, thank you so much. Emma, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much for your presentation. I had two questions, and I actually kind of have a question for Carlos too, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
I'm curious on one. Well, I'll start with you, Carlos. The life history calendar, the residency variable, for any internal migration that is not to one of, like, I think it's 8 districts or something, it's kind of aggregated. So it'll say like other district in Nepal. Is that going to be disaggregated in the life history calendar that you guys are collecting? And if so, will that be like taken back even further? I don't know. I guess I've struggled with using the LHC sometimes because of that aggregated district. I think it's number 10 on the residency variable. And then Emily, for you, I just had a question about the away sheet. I had never heard of it, but it sounds awesome. How do you link is it just arrested ID? And how would we, because a lot of times I feel like when I'm looking at the household roster, I'll see somebody and I'll be like, they're abroad, and then it'll switch to G for gone. And so to me, it's not totally clear. Is that just because they've stayed abroad and they're no longer considered a part of the household? Would they get picked up in the away sheet in that point? So kind of two different questions. But yeah, those things I was curious about.
Great. Those are good questions. And I am also new to the away sheets because we don't I don't know if they're fully digitized at this point. I think they have it's not a data file that has existed until somewhat recently. So basically, as a part of putting together this presentation, I realized that they were not deposited at ICPSR since month 36. So we have flagged that as a priority because they are so helpful for migration related research, as you noted. So we just don't, the ICPSR processing times can be a bit of a black box. So that's why I am being intentionally cagey about how soon they might be available, but our intention is to make them available. So when they are available, it would be linked by the respondent ID. You are correct about that. So you would just link it at the individual level. Your second question is a little bit more conceptual, and I think is probably dependent on individual cases. But your guess about changing to a G code, meaning that someone likely stayed abroad and then dropped out of the survey, is reasonable. But with the G codes, it just indicates that we don't know what happened to them, unfortunately. So I can't really give a more specific answer than that, unfortunately. Did that get at both of your questions about the OA sheet?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, I think, yeah, it sometimes when you're looking at particularly the HHR, you'll just see people kind of drop and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, what happened? So I didn't know if maybe the away sheet would be a way to kind of make sense of sometimes what seems like either whole families will drop and then it's assumed like, okay, maybe they all left versus individuals. So it sounds like if whole families drop, they probably would not be in the away sheet. But if you had
Correct.
this individuals leaving, we could still kind of find out where they've gone.
Yes,
Okay, cool.
that's correct, because you would need at least one respondent from the household to complete the registry interview and the away sheet. So that's
Mm-hmm.
correct, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
And
Yeah,
then I'll
and
let
Carlos,
Carlos
yeah,
answer.
I don't know if my question was totally clear, but I'm happy to clarify if it didn't make sense.
Well, thank you, Emma. What I heard you ask us is whether our life history calendar would have specific codes for individual districts within Nepal if people migrated out of Chitwan to other districts in Nepal. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, yeah. So I think of like the HHR or the registry, how in the month 138, when it switches to kind of the location variable and you have those very detailed measures, would you have those measures for residency, or would you use the kind of standard measures that you find in the life history calendar with the data you're collecting?
So I'm not sure that I can address that in terms of what do you mean by standard measures versus the more detailed measures in the life history calendar? So
Yeah,
I
so
apologize.
no, it's totally fine. In the life history calendar, for me at least, what I usually use for migration is the residency variable. And so it'll say, one for if you're in the household in Chitwan, two if you're in another household in Chitwan, and then 3 through I think about 8 are at different locations or different districts in Nepal. And then 9 says other districts in Nepal, or sorry, 10 says other districts, and 11 says international locations. So the kind of internal migration is largely aggregated. You don't have the more granular measure that you would see in the household roster, which starts in month 138, where it asks specifically about, did you go to this district? And it lists every single district, or it has the country code IDs as well. So I didn't know which measure you all would be collecting for in the upcoming life history calendar.
Yeah, good question. To be honest, I don't know off the top of my head. It's more a question for Dirga than for me, I think, at this juncture. At the same time, Emma, I think as far as I know, the monthly household data collection is continuing, right? It's so that data will still always be available for the more detailed information on that particular data element.
Yeah, no, I guess my hope was if you were going to collect retrospectively, if you would start, I think the year's 1994, whenever the first year of the life history calendar starts, and provide, 70 years of coverage, which is totally fine if you're not going to do that. But yeah, I didn't know how detailed and how far back that data would go, but I can wait and see when it gets collected.
Yeah. I will say as a word of caution, yeah, I'm not sure either, but I'm concerned about sort of the time it would take to go back that far and maybe get that kind of detail in our life history calendar, because we already know that our interview will be very, very long, and so again, it's a question maybe for Dirga more than for me at this point, but please feel free to follow up with all of us on that.
I have a somewhat related question about the away sheets. So the household registry before month 138 doesn't include specific international destinations, just aggregate international migration.
I believe it does. And maybe Cora can jump in here. I actually have never worked with that. I've only worked with the newer data. So my understanding is that yes, the destination is complete. It's just that it's at the annual level rather than the rather than the monthly level. So that if a migrant went to multiple countries in a year, that would in fact be recorded, and we have the codes for which countries they went to. It's just that you wouldn't know where they were in February versus where they were in May, for example.
And the away sheet data is also a yearly thing or a monthly?
I don't know about the, oh, that's a great question. I guess the away sheets did exist because they were for months 1 to 36. I don't actually know what frequency the registry was done in the earliest years, which is an important question. The away sheets for months 1 to 36 are on ICPSR, so I can look into that and get back to you. So maybe it was I would assume it was that they were completed at whatever frequency the registry was completed for that household at that time.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a second question about where to find the distance to urban center measure. I've been looking for it all over.
That is a great question, and I believe it might be in the restricted neighborhood use file. Would be my best guess, but I can look into that and get back to you because I have seen it, but I also don't recall exactly which data file. Heather, you don't happen to know that off the top of your head? I would assume the restricted use neighborhood file is, because it's just a straight distance. It doesn't reveal anything about the actual neighborhood location. So I believe it would be in that restricted use file, even without the GIS.
Thank you.
I also have a question.
Sure.
I'm currently trying to figure out variables related to international labor migration, and we're trying to see, like, they migrated for work, right? And like after your presentation, I feel like it's possible to extract this information for whatever reasons they migrated, right? And also, I'm assuming we should be able to create a variable that captures for how long did they reside as an international labor migrant. So now, having said that, could you please clarify, what data sets should we be looking at if we were to create these variables? And we'd want to link those variables with the data set that captures the health variable, like the 2018 data set, or the aging survey they conducted. And I've been working with Heather, Dirga, back and forth, but I'm having a very hard time understanding how these data sets are created. So I'd be thankful if you could elaborate on this. And maybe, is it okay if I, reach out to you, email you, and maybe, understand, maybe look for possibilities to work together, like Carlos mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. So the away sheets are not public. So that's the #1 restriction is there's no access, unfortunately, to the away sheets for month 37 and later at this time. They will become available at some point in the hopefully nearish future. So in the absence of knowing, so basically all of those previous published studies that I showed you, I would guess that the vast majority of them don't actually know that the person migrated for labor. But typically, like the approach I take in my own work as someone who's interested in health and early childhood and paternal migration is that if a man is migrating for, say, 2 years to Qatar, it is almost certain that that person is migrating for work. So you can triangulate and make assumptions that are reasonable based on restricting the destination and the duration. So that's why a lot of the earlier papers may have used 1 or 2 month definitions, but when you see papers that are using 3, 6, or 12-month definitions, then it's much more likely that those people are in fact migrating for work. We have seen a rise in education-related migration, so that can be hard to tease apart. But there, the destination is often the key. That it would be if someone was in Australia or Japan for 2 years, they are more likely there for education. You can also triangulate with their age. If it's an 18-year-old that is in Australia for 2 years, that's probably education versus someone who's 35 and in Saudi Arabia for 2 years is likely work. So unfortunately, in the absence of the away sheet for a specific migration episode, it is not really possible to know for sure this is work, this is marriage, this is education. But putting some of those other boundaries on your definition can help triangulate in a way that gets you to a pretty reasonable answer that has successfully passed peer review in many other papers.
Okay, thank you very much. No, I'm from Nepal myself, and I totally understand the context.
Yeah.
But having that variable that particularly measures that would be so I just wanted to know that. But thank you, this is very helpful.
Great. Yeah, I wish I had a better and more specific answer. And I am excited to get these away sheets uploaded to ICPSR because I think it really will help a lot of data users. And then the earlier question about how frequently the away sheets were collected in the early years of CVFS, I believe it was in fact monthly, that the registry was originally done monthly and then moved to every 6 months. So it is highly likely that the away sheets would have then been done monthly because they are tied to the actual registry interview itself.
On the CVFS website, we have that FAQ page and it goes into some detail there. The registry was collected monthly through month 39. So,
Great. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Coulter.
okay, I think that might be the last of our questions. Thank you very much, Emily.
Great. Thanks everyone for attending and for the great questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.